Middle East today is a less stable place since the Iran nuclear deal came under attack. Danger increases with tensions in the Gulf and political disturbance and violence in countries such as Iraq and Lebanon. And the unpredictability of the American president brings further worries. So how will Iran's regional strategies be affected by a changing U.S. Middle East policy? And what's the future for the Iran nuclear deal as Iran resumes uranium enrichment? And as Beijing's first forum on security in the Middle East wraps up, how can China help provide positive momentum? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined by Abbas Araghchi, Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhong Shi. Mr. Araghchi, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
I want to start with the situation back home in Iran because we are getting reports that Iranian security agents have arrested at least 8 CIA-related personnel. U.S. President Donald Trump has denied the accusation, calling the reports of the arrests false. What is your take on that?
Well, as you know, the government decided to increase the price of petrol in Iran for obvious reasons, because you know, the price was really cheap and the government had to pay lots of subsidies. So they decided to increase the price, and that created some protests by the people. Some people who actually protested the decision by the government came to the streets, and we believe that this is their absolute right to be able to express themselves and protest against anything they want to protest. But when things go to violence and some you know, individuals started to torching you know, buses or public and private buildings, and we felt that there are hands out of the country trying to misuse of this ordinary practice of democracy by the people, and actually take it to other directions and create a vast you know, unrest and violence inside the country. So you know, our intelligence forces, our security forces, police forces were able to control this situation, and as far as we have received information, our intelligence people have arrested some individuals with connections with outside the country, and it is obvious that they have connections with CIA or other agencies outside the country. I think it is something obvious when the U.S. declared its you know, announced policy against Iran, which is maximum pressure policy. So this is a part of that. Maximum pressure policy includes a vast variety of sanctions imposed against Iran, and of course trying to create you know, instability in Iran, trying to exercise as much as pressure as possible against Iran. So these are obvious acts of the U.S. against Iran. We have get used to these kind of policies since 40 years back when we had the revolution in Iran. So I think it is something understandable. Our intelligence forces are now working on this case to find out the real plan.
What is the latest on the 2015 Iran nuclear deal?
Well, as you know, the deal is not in a good shape after the U.S. withdrawal in 8th of May 2018. When the U.S. went out, the remaining participants in the deal, which is actually China, Russia, and the 3 European countries, asked us to stay in the deal, and they will find practical solutions to continue their economic cooperation with Iran and to let Iran enjoy from the benefits of the deal. We believe that China and Russia has been successful in this, in their efforts to some extent, but the E3 or the 3 European countries have totally failed to fulfill their promises, to find practical solutions, to continue business with Iran. They had promised us in the form of a statement issued by a ministerial JCPOA meeting. They committed themselves in 11 different areas, from banking to trade, to transportation, to insurance, to everything, so they can find practical solutions as they promised. But they failed. The only solution they have come to is a financial barter mechanism called INSTEX, which is not functional yet. Iran gave them 1 whole year to fulfill their commitments, but it didn't happen. So in 8th of May this year, we decided to make use of dispute resolution mechanism inside the deal and exercise our right as a remedy. So we started to reduce our commitments in the deal, and we have every right, according to paragraph 36, that if the other side is not fulfilling its commitments, Iran can cease application of its commitments in whole or in part. So we decided to do it in part. So we decided to take gradual steps to reduce our commitments in order to give them still a chance, to give diplomacy still a chance to find a solution out of this.
I believe you're fully aware, for people keeping a close tab on the situation, the Iranian reduction of its commitments have been very noticeable. What are the type of messages that Iran is trying to send?
The message is that we want to save the deal. The purpose is not to kill the deal. Otherwise, we could have withdrawn from the deal right after the U.S. withdrawal in 8th of May 2018, and nobody would have blamed us, because that was in reaction to what the U.S. had done. But we decided to give diplomacy a chance to save the deal. And now, again, as I said, we are exercising our right in paragraph 36 of the deal. So we are still in the deal, trying to take remedy measures in order to save the deal. So the message is, we want to save the deal, we want to go out of it altogether, but no deal can survive if there is not a balance between gives and takes. And we have no balance in the deal right now. Iran is fully committed to its obligations, of course, up to May this year, but we received nothing. So what Iran is doing is in fact trying to restore the deal restore the balance in the deal, which is not happened yet.
But have you lost confidence in the European signatories to the deal?
Well, diplomats never lose hope or confidence altogether. But I have to say that there is a little confidence left in Iran regarding the JCPOA. We still want the participants to the deal to find practical solutions as they had promised in order to save the deal. Otherwise, there would be no future for this deal. No country would remain in any deal which has no benefit for that country. I think nobody can question Iran's goodwill, Iran's good faith. We have tried our best to protect the deal, to save the deal. There are reports, after reports by the IAEA, that Iran is fully complying with the deal since 2015. So no shortcoming, no weak point from the Iranian side. But that was not reciprocated by the other side. And since 8th of May last year, after the U.S. withdrawal, all sanctions have been reimposed by the U.S. All U.S. Unilateral sanctions, which are unwarranted and illegal, have been imposed, and the other participants, mostly Europeans, have not been able to find a solution out of that.
While we're on the topic of sanctions, I do want to talk to you about the Iranian economy, which has taken a toll after the U.S. withdrew from the deal. what kind of consequences have there been? How would you categorize the damage and consequences to the Iranian economy, and how is the economy doing as we speak?
Sanctions are costly and create lots of difficulties, but at the same time they can create opportunities. After the U.S. withdrawal and reimposition of U.S. sanctions, as a matter of fact, we had some shocks in our economy. We had turbulences. Now, after more than 1.5 years, we have been able to come back to a more stable economy, and we have been able to take distance from that initial shocks in our economy. Now we have a more stable situation, mostly because we have been able to use that opportunities which I said created out of sanctions. Now we have established bilateral barter mechanisms with many of our partners. We have established bilateral financial mechanisms based on local currencies with many of our economic partners, including China. And we have been able to find practical ways to manage our economy.
Okay.
We have lived with the U.S. sanctions in the past 40 years. We know how to find our ways out of that. We know how to manage ourselves in such a difficult way. And as I said, we are trying to use the opportunities created out of sanctions. And one of them is a long-lasting, ambition to get rid of oil in our economy. We have been always tried to make our economy not dependent on oil. And this time, since the sanctions are more serious and the U.S. is following a zero oil export for Iran, so we have now more serious to, in fact, plan our budget without any dependence on oil. And the government is working on that. It is difficult. It is not easy. It may need lots of changes in economic parameters inside the country. It may create protest and unrest by people, but we are serious to follow that policy, and I'm confident that we would be successful, as we have now much better situation than last year.
Thank you very much for your candid answers. We're going to take a quick break here on Dialogue. We have much more coming up. What will it take for Iran to want to talk and to want to come back to the table?
We don't negotiate under maximum pressure, and I think no country would do that.
How will domestic U.S. politics affect Iran's way of dealing with Washington?
We don't take our decisions based on U.S. domestic situation or politics. We are not counting on who is the U.S. president and who is not.
Welcome back. You're watching Dialogue on CGTN. Mr. Araghchi, what will it take for Iran to want to talk and to want to come back to the table?
First of all, we don't negotiate under maximum pressure. And I think no country would do that. It would be negotiation for surrender if you go and negotiate while you are under maximum pressure. So for that obvious reason, we are not ready to negotiate with the United States at any level. There is also another reason. We did negotiate with the U.S. in a multilateral format, of course, on our nuclear program, on a very important, sensitive question. We did negotiate with the U.S., together, of course, with 3 Europeans, China and Russia, in a collective format, and we came to a conclusion. We cut a deal called JCPOA. And we implemented the deal in good faith, but that was not reciprocated by the other side. And then, after a while, US decided to withdraw because they found the deal not in their interest. Although the deal is actually a decision by the Security Council. You know, the deal is not between Iran and P5+1 or E3+3, whatever you prefer. This is a decision by the Security Council. If you see Resolution 2231, it has made JCPOA as its own decision. And the whole JCPOA is annexed to the Resolution 2231. So in fact, that resolution is the longest resolution ever in the history of Security Council. But US violated a Security Council resolution as a permanent member. And they go out of the deal and they reimpose sanctions against Iran. So that experience of dealing with the US, negotiating with the US, turned out to be a very bad experience. Turned out to be a failed experience to negotiate with the US. We have totally lost our confidence to any good faith in the United States to negotiate with the United States because there is no good faith in their side. So, as a matter of principle, we don't negotiate under maximum pressure. And as an example in the history, in the very recent history, we had a failed experience of talking with the US.
It's safe to assume that the Trump administration will not change its maximum pressure campaign anytime soon. And going into 2020, with the presidential campaign there in the United States, I believe Tehran is watching that closely. How will domestic U.S. politics affect Iran's way of dealing with Washington, or Iran's patience, or maybe a longer-term strategy there?
Well, actually, we don't take our decisions based on U.S. domestic situation or politics. We are not counting on who is the U.S. president and who is not. We have a very basic principle strategy, and we are following it very carefully. We don't think that the change of president in the United States would change anything in the relation with Iran, unless somebody come who can fulfill the commitments they have already made.
I see.
And unless they are back to the JCPOA, so we can again talk with them in the JCPOA format. That's the only possibility. We don't care who is elected in the next presidential election, because we have drawn our policy out of all these calculations. We have a different calculation based on our own principles, based on our own national interest and national security. So that is out of question for us.
Okay, I do want to talk to you about the Middle East region as a whole and other players in the region, one of them being Russia. It is well observed that Moscow has been enhancing ties with countries in the region and sort of strengthening its role as a mediator there. What's your take on Russia's activities in the region?
Well, actually, Russia has enjoyed well-established historic ties with the Middle East, with some countries in the Middle East in the past. And now it seems that they are reviving those old connections, and they are back to the region. We consider Russia as a major international player, and we believe that Russia can play a constructive role in the Middle East. And we have a good example, and that is Syria. As you know, Iran, Russia, and Turkey have started a process called Astana process. And I think that process has been very successful to fight with Daesh elements in Syria, to end, to some extent, civil war and conflicts in Syria, and to be able to find, a political solution for the problem in Syria. And now, as you know, a constitutional committee is created out of efforts in Astana process. So Russia's involvement in Syria has been a constructive one. And we are closely working with them, cooperating with them, and consulting with them. We believe that Russia can play the same constructive role in other problems in the Middle East, if they are interested to do that. Of course, every country, every problem in the Middle East has its own characteristics. In some of them, some specific countries can be useful, can be constructive, like Russia. And we actually working with Russians in and have close consultations with them in almost every question and problem in the Middle East. I just recently visited Moscow. Of course, again, JCPOA was the main topic of my discussions, but I had also a vast discussion and consultations on almost every problem in the Middle East. So we think that Russia can play a constructive role.
I find it very interesting when you said that Iran looks for opportunities in crisis, but now looking at the overall situation in the Middle East, with the new chaos comes the possibility of a resurgence of terrorism, comes the possibility of a spate of other issues, spillover effects all across the region. Does Iran see opportunities there also? How does Iran plan to cope with these rising problems, potential problems?
Well, terrorism is a common threat. And we see terrorism in the Middle East as a big threat to each and every country of the region, for all peoples of the region. And we think that there is a joint responsibility by all countries of the region and beyond the region to combat with terrorism. And we are so sorry and disappointed to see that some specific countries in the region or outside the region supports this kind of terrorism. They have created Daesh, for example. They have sponsored financially and logistically Daesh with their horrific acts in the region. So we believe that we have a joint responsibility to combat terrorism, and this is a common threat to each and every of us. We have done our share. We have played a very important role in fighting with Daesh and other terrorist elements in the region, and that is mostly for our own national security. And we continue to defend ourselves, to defend our national security, and to defend the security of the region, which is the security of us and each and every member of the region. That is our policy, and we appreciate and we welcome any common efforts by countries of the region to combat terrorism.
Mr. Araghchi, as you know, we've just held the first ever Middle East Security Forum here in Beijing, and people are going to wonder, why China? Why Beijing? This is about the Middle East security. Is there a Chinese voice? Is there a Chinese perspective? What do you make of the timing?
I think the timing is good, even late. China is very...
Better late than never?
Of course, it's always better late than never. China is a major player, major international player. And we believe that, like Russia, China also can play a very constructive role in problems that exist in the Middle East and, of course, other regions. We have a good experience of working with China for, coming to a conclusion on Iran's nuclear program. China was a part of JCPOA and is still an important participant to the JCPOA. And we appreciate Chinese position, by the way, to protect the deal and to save the deal. So China already played its role in the JCPOA, which was a very important question in the Middle East. Let me to tell you, we have lots of problems and crises in the Middle East, from Libya to Afghanistan. We have everything. I don't want to go into details. But we had only one question. which resolved through diplomacy, without any conflict, without any violence, without shedding any blood. And that was Iran's nuclear program. That was the only problem in our region. Without going into bloody war or crisis or whatever, we were able to introduce a win-win game, to use diplomacy and to achieve a peaceful settlement which made the whole world happy. And China was a part of that. China was a part of that solution. As a permanent member of the Security Council, China participated in nuclear negotiations with Iran. China played a very constructive role, and China was a major element in the conclusion of the deal and in the implementation of the deal. And you know, one of the important projects inside the JCPOA is Iraq heavy water reactor project, is to modernize Iraq heavy water research reactor into a proliferation-free nuclear reactor. And China is leading that project. China is the country who is leading this project. And we are quite satisfied. So I think that example can be extended to other problems in the region. China can play a very successful role in difficulties which exist in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf, especially since China is very much, you know, needs that region for its energy. You know, China, lots of energy of China is provided by the Persian Gulf region. So of course China has a direct interest in the region. Okay. And China has direct concerns about this region. So any constructive participation would be welcomed by Iran, as we welcomed the participation of China in the JCPOA negotiations.
You have spoken favorably, I believe, of China's role in the nuclear deal and in the region, but what suggestions would you give China in positioning itself in the region? You talked about interests, China's legitimate and rightful interests in the region. What suggestions would you give?
Well, you know, of course, problems in the region, security in the region should be resolved, should be provided by countries of the region. But there are countries as major international players with direct interest and concerns in the region who can help, and China is one of them. So we appreciate China participates in the processes inside the region. I already made the example of Astana process between Iran, Russia and Turkey. So we may have other processes in which China can participate, can contribute, can, you know, does its share in a constructive way. And Iran is ready to work with China on countries, on problems in the region in which China has a direct or indirect interest and concerns. And I think we can work with each other.
All right, a pleasure, Mr. Araghchi, to have you on CGTN. Thank you for making time for us.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.